You are recording.
All right, good evening. Welcome to the March 22nd Newari meeting in Needham. This open meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely, and it allows public bodies to meet remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. This meeting will not feature public comment, but I do note that it is being recorded. I want to start this evening actually with a moment of silence for the victims who were killed in Atlanta, particularly the Asian women. I'm not going to say their names because I haven't got a definitive place where I can know they're pronounced correctly, so I'm going to apologize for that, but I do want to remember all of them, so if we could take a moment, please. So I know that many of us were at the vigil on the town common. I'm grateful for all those who took the time to be there. I was moved by many of the speeches, but I was particularly moved by Renee, one of the students at Needham High School. And what I really wanted to focus on, because I think it's central to the business of this group and to what we talk about for our message with the town. Since our last meeting, I've received a packet of information from somebody in the town that said, stop the hate on the outside, and had a lot of information that in some cases was a little bit difficult to read, and certainly indicated that they didn't appreciate the work of this committee. So I don't believe that we are here to hate anybody, but what I appreciate about her words was they echoed that. We often talk about walking in other people's shoes as a way to appreciate their experiences. She turned that around and she said, rather than telling you to put yourself in other people's shoes, I encourage you to stay in your own shoes and reevaluate yourself. Before entering your classroom, office, restaurant, reflect on who you are and what you bring to create a loving community. Because in a society so clearly built on violence and hate, you are the first step to the change we so desperately need. And I really think that that is what this group has been talking about. It's not about hate. It's about what are we each going to do to create a loving community here for everyone. And then I was further touched with a friend of mine, Christine Cruz Vergara, who posted a Rumi poem that said, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. And so with that, I'm hoping that we can start our discussions this evening. We have two very important pieces of business in front of us tonight. The first one, Lisa has joined us because our first one is to approve our final vision statement and guiding principles and intentional practices so that that can be forwarded to the select board and ultimately so that we can bring it to town meeting and ask for their endorsement of this vision and guiding principles. Lisa, do you want to hop on and unmute? Oh, kitty cats. They're always the best.
So unmuting would be helpful. I'm being blinded by the light here. In any case, we have developed and presented what we hope to be the final draft for the select board. And I think it is a reflection of all of the hard work of the members and the members of Newari. And I also believe that we've done a fair share of wordsmithing and trying to ride the fine line between what is progressive and what helps people feel comfortable or feel challenged or feel courage to be in the conversation. And so I'm not sure what the particular format is for this evening, so I will lead as instructed.
So I'm wondering, have people had any further thoughts since our last meeting that they would like to add? Or have we all read it and reconsidered it and said, yep, that is what we meant to say? And it's not to say that this is the final thing and that this will never change, but I think this would be a great place for the town to start and for us to commit to.
I will also add that during our time together, I have been in communication with other towns, and in one town in particular has already noted that Nuari's work, and in addition to the school side, has been a model for other towns. So even before this is adopted conclusively, it is already being seen as a model. So that was encouraging to hear. I am concluding that everyone received the final draft a couple of weeks ago and took a look at it. I did not receive any emails in dissension or opposition. So, you know, that saying silence means consent. I think that we are buying into our document, which I feel is really strong. And as a non-resident of Needham, I hope that you are all proud of that. I have mentioned to some of, you know, the 3 people I know in Needham that good things are on the horizon and that I expect them as my friends to be fully on board with the upcoming work.
Thank you, Lisa. So if anybody has a comment, that would be great. Otherwise, I would welcome a motion to adopt and recommend.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? I'm going to thank everybody for weighing the weight of every word that's in here, at least twice, maybe 3 times. All right, I'm going to call everybody's name as part of our vote. Matt,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Ramin,
Yes.
Vivian,
Yes.
Natasha,
Yes.
Toyin,
Yes.
and Marianne votes yes. They are adopted and recommended. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Lisa. Yay.
You all.
The select board is looking forward to receiving them tomorrow. So that's wonderful. The next order of business we have is our second session on law enforcement. And for that, I know that we sent out to everybody and it's been made public on the town website, the Tidwell report. Actually, we made public the Tidwell report and the initial draft that was received of the Tidwell report. That draft was received so that the town could review it and ensure that it met what we had asked for. The feedback that we provided to Ms. Tidwell was that we were looking for really a very specific set of recommendations that could be clearly identified going forward in the report. And that led to the redrafting for the second version. We also did inform her that an author had been made of an apology. And that led to another change that happened, I think, in the last paragraph. We didn't ask for that change. We just let her know that there had been an apology offered. The select board statement, again, because we're functioning, you know, under open meeting law, the select board had delegated to the chair of the select board to work with the town manager to create the draft of the statement. I know that a number of people at least said what was important to them that be included in that statement. Certainly the apology was a significant part of what I hoped to have included, as well as a recognition of the work ahead. So that particular statement I don't view as dispositive in any way. It is the beginning of the work that the town needs to undertake. And I am grateful to Ms. Tidwell for outlining so many actions that need to be taken. And in addition to that, I know that when I spoke at the select board meeting, I talked about the way in which internal investigations work and sort of my surprise that I had, at least. So it's a learning experience for all of us with how that functioned within a department, just because it was a completely different model than I've seen in a corporation or in a higher ed institution, which are my two spheres that I had been involved in the past. So these are all learning experiences that we'll bring and that we can use to make better. But tonight is our night to talk with the chief about that. Kate, I don't know, would John like to speak first? John, I can't see John above his name. John and Chris are both there, I think, but you're kind of buried under your name on our screen, or at least on my screen.
Yeah, it's a new area where we're doing this, so we were trying to zoom in the camera, but time did not allow for exploration of doing that. So unfortunately, look like we're a mile away. But can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, thanks for having me back. And I think the first session that I was there, I think had some meaningful discussion and some insight, not only for us, but probably for some of you as well. In regards to the Tidwell report, we always understand that we look for ways to get better. And the conclusion of that report are suggesting some things that we can do to get better. I did release a statement, and I do believe that the officers, with the information that they had, acted within the law based on the totality of the circumstances and the information that they had. But I do believe that the human side of this, we definitely could do better. There's a lot of things that we could have done to maybe put Mr. Henry at ease. And as in my statement, we regret any distress that may have caused him. So we're looking at some of those recommendations, some other things that we might do obviously on our own to enhance the possibility that, as in interactions with law enforcement in general, I would love for everybody to walk away from our interaction happy and satisfied, but by the sheer nature of this job, that doesn't always happen, and it's very difficult. And I think, again, these are learning things I think that we can do to get better and find better ways to engage with the community going forward to try and stay away from some of those incidents.
John, before I fully open it up for questions, do you want to talk at all about some of the changes that you've already instituted?
Sure. So some of the things that we did prior to this report coming out is we sent 2 lieutenants to an 5-day internal affairs investigation course, which they became certified in internal affairs. I know one of the lieutenants had some prior training in this area. And then one of the other areas that we addressed early on was we added a mandatory field. It's a special category when officers are filling out report. So it's a check off box. So they have to check if the person was handcuffed. And if the answer is yes, then it's a mandatory. They have to give a reason why. So now not only does it provide us with the availability to track the data a lot easier, but it also confirms that they have to make that, they can't finish and send the report to the supervisor without those boxes being checked off and addressed. So one, not only does it address the need for the report, and it also addresses the idea that we can actually go in and track that type of data a lot easier. I know some of the other things that we've done is that we're working with town meeting and the select board to develop a bias-based review of data that we will share with the select board and the town manager during the course of the year. So this will be kind of a dashboard that will talk about arrests, ops, encounters in those type of scenarios, so that this will be something that will be done regularly, so that we'll be able to monitor it more frequently. It'll be put out in as a public record as well. And then we also, back in, I want to say September or October, we put out a special order, which was basically was suspicious persons is a policy or an order that we already had, but we addressed it, and it's basically a bias by proxy. So a lot of times people will call the police station and say, hey, there's somebody suspicious in my neighborhood. And what this does now is they might say, the dispatcher might say, hey, what makes them suspicious? Well, I'm not sure. And then we try and get some demographic information. They might say it's a person of color, or it's this or that. So now with this special order, it takes the dispatcher through a series of questions to ascertain more information, determining what suspicious behavior might be. And before a determination that an officer is sent, they're to notify the sergeant, who makes the ultimate decision. Because unfortunately, those things do happen. You know, so that's one thing that we wanted to do to address some of those calls, because they do happen, but we want to make sure that it's reviewed prior to sending somebody. Because in past, a lot of times a suspicious person, the dispatcher takes the call. They're not necessarily trained in law enforcement and police response, and they'll dispatch a cruiser. And then the officer responds and encounters that person, and, you know, then we go from there. But if we can avoid that, I think that's a great thing going forward, because it does bring up some difficult situations that we want to try and avoid for obvious and numerous reasons. So those are some of the things that we've done. Some of the suggestions that were suggested by Attorney Tidwell, we're waiting, such as policies on use of force, you know, the SRO policy and so forth. The whole police reform is in different stages of development and rollout. So the idea is that there's a commission to study, you know, these policies, and they're going to send out a special or a statewide template that has the wording that should be included in use of force policy, the SRO policy. It'll also address MOUs with the schools. So they're kind of a work in progress. We're waiting for those to come out. So we don't want
John, can I just interrupt for a moment in case people don't know? SRO, School Resource Officer, MOU, Memorandum of Understanding.
Yeah.
Just, I'm sorry to interrupt your stream of thought, but I just don't want somebody to get lost in the initials here.
So I think these are some of the things that we're waiting on, a little bit of guidance from the state, the Mass Police Training Council, which may work with Executive Office of Public Safety to develop some of these policies. And when they become available, then we'll make the necessary adjustments based on the police reform law.
And Chief, when are you expecting those? So are we in a situation where we may be thinking in some areas about an interim or a bridge to those being created? I don't fully understand the timeline for that.
So a lot of the issues are supposed to be in place by July, and then some by next December, according to the police reform law. So we anticipate some of those coming out this summer, and then some of them coming out this fall. We did adjust our use of force policy last year. We'll make some different changes, minor changes, and then wait on the wording from the police reform law, because it's hard to put something in place with a document like that, because I think it's about 30 or 40 pages maybe. So it's very extensive. So we don't want to make a lot of changes and have to reissue it and re-go through it again. But I think most of the immediate needs were already in there. But again, we're waiting on the rollout to implement most of those.
So I'm certain when people read the report that you, like the select board members, had a range of emotions. Frustration, sadness, disappointment, up to anger on some things. I'm certain that all of those existed. And I appreciate Chief Slitler's, and I'm not sure, but I think Lieutenant Baker is with us.
Yes.
Is that just so people know who's kind of hidden there? You know, I appreciate their coming to join us tonight, and with that, I do want to open it up so that you can get your questions asked and answered, and so that we can think about where we are and consider from a Nuari's perspective the recommendations that have been given and what we need to do as a town going forward. Ramin?
I after reading the report and also seeing the select board meeting, I have thousands of questions and emotions and feelings. But I like to put those aside for now and take a sort of share some of my thoughts and reflections, if it's okay, with the chief and the lieutenant. Racism is a disease. Just like we will not be surprised if during this pandemic, one of us catches the COVID. And the COVID has been around for only a year. Racism has been in this country for 400 years. And it has penetrated every fabric of our society and has impacted every individual. Black, white, immigrant, born, native born, we have all been influenced by it and have been affected by it. It has deprived over the years a segment of our nation from cultivating, expressing their best and their fullest capacities and capabilities. And it has also impacted the majority white people as well and influenced them. So no one, I think, can be sure or even have the sense of being free of it. We have to deal with it. And unlike the current pandemic where we can wash hands, put masks, look for the vaccine, there is no simple protection or simple cure for it. It's going to take, I would say, it's going to take a humble posture of learning. The openness to want to learn, the openness to want to understand, and we have to do it in a humble way because otherwise we will not learn and we would not advance to the next point. And it's not just that you or your department have to take the humble posture of learning. All of us really need to take that humble posture to try to learn and advance. And I think if any group, whether it's the police department, whether it's us as individuals or groups, take that posture, it will open up opportunities for us to be able to work collaboratively to address this. The idea of contest and conflict is not going to solve this problem for us. We need to open this up and to be able to bring in people to collaborate with each other to address it. And so you and I had a conversation, Chief, during the vigil. You said something that was very true, that Needham has changed quite a bit and is changing so rapidly. It has also changed in the sense that in the last few years, we have now many more groups and organizations that are devoted to address this issue of racism. And I would like to really encourage you to, again, with that humble posture of learning on everyone's side, to work with these groups, to develop activities that go beyond checking of a box, oh, I did my diversity training, that would open up more in-depth and more deeper learning and understanding of what these issues are. Otherwise, we will not be able to solve this problem. we'll be coming back to this kind of issues and situations over and over again, and sometimes maybe even more painful than this. So my hope, I'm expressing it to everyone here, is that we will start moving in that direction before we get into defensiveness or to offensiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramin.
I will ask my questions later, maybe.
Questions later. And I know that when you say that you hope that we will all do this, that you, like me, know that hope is not a strategy, and we actually want to end up with something more concrete than that also. Yes. Other thoughts or questions? Jay.
Hi, Chief and Lieutenant, thank you so much for joining us. Chief, I was really struck by, I attended the select board meeting, your willingness and openness to, have a dialogue and figure out a way, a way forward, a better way forward. My question really goes to the Tidwell report. Can you talk about any of the recommendations that you feel that may not be appropriate, or other recommendations that you may be looking at that may have come out of work that you've seen that's not part of the Tidwell report?
Sure. I think the recommendations, in general were fair. And I think in some of those, they might not be as all-encompassing as maybe recommended, but I think there are areas that we definitely need to improve in. We are still reviewing some of that and reviewing what our policies and what those recommendations are. So I think, in that aspect, yeah, I mean, there are definitely, the recommendations are relevant. And we're gonna work with not only the department, the town, the select board, and whoever else may be involved to address those and to make sure that they represent the community. I think the one thing, when I look at something that's outside the department that we've thought about, and I think I've mentioned this before, the job itself is very difficult. And I think what's happened, not only through the pandemic, but the social justice things that have happened over the last year and a half or so, they're so important, not only to us, but the community. But I'm worrisome that we need to have that conversation. We need to have that ability to work together, because I think, and it's something we've discussed internally, is that we're worried that there's a possibility that it may separate us from the community a little bit more, because we're concerned, we're worried. Officers, they get worried about their families and their job and their ability to support. And we're trying to find ways that will allow us to come together as a community, to work together, to ensure that the steps going forward are meaningful, and they're steps that can be carried on when I'm gone. But it's a slow process, but we're committed to it. And we're working with our department to do that. I think that's something that it wasn't mentioned in the Tidwell report, but it starts with that connection. It starts with the community, because I think traditionally, law enforcement has always been seen as an enforcement agency, that we're there just to enforce the laws, that they were the motor vehicle laws. But as you can see, and I think it's been well documented in the last, 5 to 7 years, that we have taken on many different roles, and having our ability of our officers to be involved in the community, be liaison different committees, the school resource officers, the community outreach officer, the community service officer, even Rocket the dog. I mean, during a pandemic, he's been unbelievable. So we're really trying to get involved in the community, to be seen in a different light, that we want to be part of the solution. And it takes a community to do that. And we want to make sure that that bridge between the community and law enforcement gets closer, so that we as a community can move forward. And there's work to be done, no doubt about it. But I think our past history has shown that we're devoted to the community. We're trying to make the difference and be involved in the community because it's so important, because we want people to see us as there for help, not just the enforcement side.
Thank you. Anything else, Jay, before I move on? We can always come back.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. The one follow-up question I would ask though is that from an accountability and perspective, as you talk about the investigations and sending, folks through, what are your thoughts, or where do you see, the department going in terms of, looking at issues as they come up? Is it involving, perhaps an independent organization, or do you feel that it's going to be handled more internally? And if so, why?
Well, part of the police reform, the legislation is that there is the certification is a post. It's called the police officer standards. So part of that will be officers will have to be certified within the state of Massachusetts, but they also will decertify as well. So the way that it's set up and the formal methods of how this is going to happen is that if people have complaints or there's incidents, they can file it with the post commission, and they will have an independent board review and work with the local departments to investigate those. I'm just not 100% sure of the rollout, but this post reform creates a separate investigating authority to look at some of these incidents.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Marcus?
Hey, Chief. Hi, Lieutenant. Thank you both for being here. The opportunity to see each other a couple times our last few days, Chief. So, it's been nice to see you. I had just a couple questions kind of wrapped into a couple different points. And I know you mentioned the use of force policy. And you said it was revised, I believe, back in November. And I think de-escalation was kind of put in there. But I know that the policy, it doesn't take in consideration, I think, of all parties and interactions, including the detainee or the suspect. And, do you believe, or Lieutenant, do you believe, and I know you're waiting on more information, that it needs to be significantly revised? And do you feel like a ground up approach or started from scratch would be helpful in this reform that I know you're waiting on more answers from, but you personally? And in your opinion, do you feel like that is something that would be done if you had the option in-house, or would you have experts come in and kind of help you with the de-escalation tactics and things like that to really ramp up and see that done in a better way as opposed to what it's kind of been over these last years?
So de-escalation, I think one of the big things that, with our training is that de-escalation has been a big part of all of our training. I know that the use of force policy doesn't elaborate on de-escalation. The use of force policy, when it comes back from post, is going to have appropriate language in there as developed by them that'll talk about de-escalation. But all of our training where we do firearms, our taser, our fall and spring training requirements for our firearms, our active shooter, and then we have a new system called Milo. It's an interactive, it's almost like a video game where we have all of our equipment, and it brings you through scenarios, and the people that are running the scenarios can adjust it based on how you're reacting. So de-escalation is one of those major parts of everything that we do. Like our taser training that I went through last year. For example, we had, you got a call to somebody breaking into a house. And so you respond, the person's at the side of the house, he's got a weapon in his hand. He turns and sees you, and he takes a step towards you with the weapon in his hand. he's not listening to your commands, so you have your taser out. He ends up dropping the weapon, and you transition from either some people had their taser out, some people had their firearm. The people had their firearm transferred to the taser because now he didn't have a weapon. So those are real life stress conditions that they put you through, and it's very hard to replicate what happens on the street. But de-escalation is a major part of all our training, and it's important. You know, obviously it could be elaborated a little bit more, but I think when the new policy comes out, it's going to have language that's going to be required to be in it, that's going to be approved by Executive Office of Public Safety and the Mass Police Training Commission.
And along those lines, with that, I know the policies, when it comes to handcuffing, is something that is seen as routine and common, I think, in the Needham police policies, you know, but having more than, I think there's been over 400 in the past 3 years, and the Tidwell report talks about to treating that more seriously. And it feels like something like that could help affect or be an infringement on a person and a likely result in trauma. So how do you feel or understand why that may not be in the use of force policy now, but with that suggestion, is that something that you feel should be in there?
Well, so a lot of those numbers are probably people that were physically arrested. So they were arrested for a charge. But if I'm correct, I believe the Tidwell report speaks to the handcuffing of a compliant subject was within the best practices of that policy, correct? Yeah. So that compliant handcuffing of an individual in the use of force was in best practices. So we don't take it lightly.
That's why we added that.
And that's why we added that special field into the incident report, so that if someone is handcuffed, it's a mandatory field and that you can't go on until that field is filled out. So, though we do definitely take it seriously, that's going to be one of our focuses in upcoming training, because the ability to move from a threshold inquiry to probable cause to an arrest is a very gray and difficult area to understand. It's something that officers receive training yearly through standardized, the in-service training, which is provided by the Mass Police Training Council, that they have to do yearly. But it's something that, you know, in light of this, we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're going to do additional training in that and writing reports to make sure that we cover that and we're able to go back and look at it and address the areas of need, you know, that we feel that the officers are deficient in.
One thing I noticed Attorney Tidwell mentioned was de-escalation as an overarching principle of the use of force policy. And I think that's a great point. I just don't know what if Post is going to send out what is required, and if there's an ability to add our own based on research or expert opinion or whatever. And then, like, I'm not sure how, if Post is just going to push a mandated use of force report or a policy, or if they're going to allow for some, like for Needham to have its own kind of and get it approved through Post. So it's kind of what we're hesitant and waiting to see what comes out of that. But I did notice that one of her recommendations was to make de-escalation like an overarching principle rather than just mentioned in.
Right. More detail with that. And then I know, Chief, you talked about tasers and weapons training and things like that, but I guess more what I'm thinking about de-escalation in that sense is how do we get it from getting to that point? Like, what are we doing? There's lots of trainings and lots of things, but if we're not getting to a point where we need that, what are we doing as far as, you know, preventing that from happening and, you know, stopping that aspect? All the trainings I think are important, but I don't know if that's exactly what the focus should be. I just elaborate a little bit more about that.
So we did have officers attend a de-escalation training this year, and Lieutenant Baker could talk a little bit more about it.
We had a current psych nurse come in.
Lieutenant, it's a little hard to hear you. Sorry, I just want to make sure we can hear.
We had a training in November. We put the entire department through. There were a few that missed it. They're making up the class in the beginning of April. So all sworn officers, current sworn officers, will have attended this de-escalation training. And it was more about using your mouth to de-escalate, verbal judo and nonverbal tools, and specifically on address how to handle mental health calls with more using your mouth and going right to tools that officers use.
So talk also about a lot of putting yourself in a position, not putting yourself in a position of, in a defensive position where you're cornered. It talks about having the ability to know what your situation is going in there, and then using communication as a tool. If you go into a hospital, or you're going into a mental health issue at a house, getting information from the family, getting information from people that are there too. So before you go in, you're not going in at a 10, you're going in at a 2. And if they escalate, then you kind of move up, but you're trying to bring it back down. But so that's what this training really did. It put you in a position how to use communication and some other skills. And it gave you some background of, people that are homicidal, or people that are schizophrenic, and it gave you best practices on how to approach that. And a lot of times you could just sit there and, you know what? Maybe you walk away, or maybe, depending if the family's okay with it, but it gave you best practices and some insight on how to deal with people with different issues that you might encounter during a potential threatening incident.
So Marcus, as I think about what you asked and what the chief responded to, I know when he talked first about tasers and weapons, I suspect that there are many more incidents that don't involve tasers and weapons than that do. And so those are all the cases I think that the chief just referred to that I was interested in hearing about. What are they really doing with those? So it was helpful, and thank you for asking that clarifying question so that we did get to that level of the conversation. John, it's interesting to me as you continue to talk about the post commission. So I think we will all be curious to see whether the post commission issues something that's comprehensive, and whether that comprehensive in fact meets our needs, or whether it ends up getting negotiated to only be a floor, and we are still going to need to talk about whether it meets our needs. Or meets the expectations of the community. So I feel like we're in this kind of limbo-ish place. Hopefully the limbo isn't long, and if it's coming in July, but there's definitely unknowns where we're going to have to see how it aligns with the recommendations of the report and where we think the community is going, so that we can best serve each other and build the trust that's required to go forward as a community. Marcus?
I think speaking off that's, I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time, but when you say that, and I think about the post, what we're waiting for exactly, is that going to be sort of in lines with an oversight committee? Is that what that's going to be? Or is that something that is going to be completely separate? And as far as accountability, and do you feel like, chief or lieutenant, having that independent or community-led oversight committee is something, when we talk about transparency, and we talk about that community engagement and building that relationship, is something that you would be in favor of?
I think it's something we definitely would look at, but I do, there's, when you look at something like that and having some oversight, obviously we want to be transparent, and, we're working towards that. But it depends. I mean, this is all new. So we're trying to weigh what's going to come out through the post commission, and then, what Mary Ann indicated is we just don't know right yet. So obviously it's something that we'll look at and we'll have discussions about, but we need a little bit more information on it. But it is something that is there, and it's something that we're cognizant of. You know, and if it's something, a discussion that we have to have once we get some more information about the rollout and find that it's inadequate, then maybe there's something you have to have further discussion on.
My understanding is that Post is, at least from what it sounds like, going to be involved in the hiring process potentially, as well as pushing out mandatory training. So it's kind of, it's hard to just sit and wait, but we kind of have to see what comes out and how much oversight they're going to have. Like they're going to look at internal affairs, they're going to look at complaints. So it's kind of hard to, it seems like a lot that they're taking on, and it'll be kind of interesting to see what they settle on and then kind of make decisions going from there, I think.
It is, but I think one of the things that it takes away the power of civil service to impose discipline as well. So the Post Commission will have the overriding authority on discipline. That it's in the past, if you're disciplined, if you're a civil service department, then you would file an appeal with the Civil Service Commission. You go in front of a board and they weigh all the evidence and come up with a decision. Well, the way that the legislation is drafted, that it would take discipline out of civil service hands and would be solely based on the Post Commission board. That the whole idea, it's this, if you're going to decertify an officer, that it goes through the process. So if there's a complaint or if there's an issue, if we get a complaint to us, the Needham Police, by the way it's drafted, is we have to forward it to the Post Commission oversight board, and then they make a determination of how they're going to handle it, and then they communicate with us how they want to handle it. And they're going to, you know, oversee however they do. But what it does, it takes out the Civil Service Commission, which has primarily been the disciplining authority for most police departments in the state.
And I think you mentioned how the civil service, or what it kind of ties the hand when we talked about having a more diverse police staff and things like that. So is this Post Commission going to, when you talk about them helping with the hiring process, are they going to kind of help facilitate that so your hands aren't tied? Or are they going to, you talked about that in the previous call. So I just want to know, is that going to be a positive for our future as far as what we look like as a police department?
And we hope so. I know as part of the police reform too, there's going to be a commission to study the overall effectiveness of civil service within the state.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to have a big impact on the future of civil service going forward.
Okay.
So,
All right, I'll pause.
so Marcus, what I want to say there is my concern, all right, and the piece that I think the select board talks about is it's not clear to us that we're at the point where we would want to wait for the state to decide that civil service. I think we continue to convey that that's a priority for us sooner rather than later, because we think
Absolutely.
it's extremely important
Absolutely.
to the diversity on the police force.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Okay. I will, if anybody else has questions, go ahead, and I'll ask more after someone else. I'll be respectful of, I have a lot to say, so just.
I'm going to break up Marcus's
Yeah.
speech.
Come on in.
So thank you, Chief and Lieutenant. I think it's really great, you know, that you're open to all of these discussions and all of the, you know, the information that you're giving us. I've designed police stations for, I don't know, 10 years or so. I designed the Nubian Square station and currently working on the East Boston Police Station. And they're community-based stations. So I'm looking at, I don't know the technicalities of you know, what the state is doing, and what I can say from my experience working with all these different communities is that we create, and I know there is one because of PPBC, I know that we have a community room and all of that. People, you know, still do not feel safe going to, even though we're designing buildings to create community spaces, people still don't feel safe. And I heard some of it last summer when before Nuwari began, that they felt, you know, uncomfortable because there are so few minorities in our town, right? And so, so I guess what I'm getting to is that I think one of the things that we should do is with you and with your department is have a listening session with the community to understand how they could feel safer and how they could really engage and be part, use the community room and really be a partner in this so that we can understand what the issues are and how we can not only address them, but also find accountability for it. And it's not an easy task, and I don't have any solutions for it. We design buildings and then they don't even get used sometimes in the way that we intend them, even though we have the best intention. So how can we help you and help the community kind of create a bridge to find solutions where everyone feels safe and comfortable? And I guess that's what I wanted to say. Again, I don't know the technicalities of some of the laws of things that are happening, but I think there's this link to the community that that we really need to focus on so that then everyone has a buy-in into how the procedures are happening. Again, it's going to be a compromise in a lot of different ways, but I think that's a really important piece. And I think that would probably help demystify some of the things that we've been going through.
Agreed. And I think it's a two-way street, because I think in the past, we're very protective of ourselves, and we don't, really let the community know some of the things that we go through. And they don't have an understanding as much as we might not have an understanding as well. But I think if you have the ability to have those conversations and speak with the different groups, and that's why we try and be so involved in the community and the different groups to start to bridge that process. But I think it's important for people to understand some of the things that we've gone through, some of the things that we've seen, and incidents that happened 20 years ago that I can remember that are today, and the psychological toll that takes on officers. And a lot of times, we don't do enough to make sure that our officers are okay, even though we try as much as we can, with community, with the peer support. And, one of the items of this post certification is the creating an officer wellness and a peer support program. And, so I think it's a conversation that we have to have both ways, so that they have an understanding why maybe we do some things, and maybe if they better understand why we do it, they understand that it's not bad intentions, but there's policies or there's certain ways we do things that if we can get that out and we can talk about it, that people might feel more comfortable coming here. But it's a goal that we want to make sure that people do feel comfortable. Again, it's that stigma of, that whole enforcement side of being a police officer, that it's a difficult hurdle to get over when you have that part of what you do. But if you can start laying the groundwork and the foundation that we do so much more, and that's kind of a last response in some of those situations that we want to happen. The last thing we want to do is take somebody to go to jail or go to court. We try and find different ways through diversion programs, through different types of thing. We don't physically arrest them. We let them go to a hearing so that they can get services if they need be. But it's just if we can get that message out, and then we hear the message from them, maybe we can make some common ground, and going forward, we have, a better understanding, which may help the whole cause going forward.
Yeah, I agree. It's communication and transparency from both sides, from every side, right? And then finding common ground. Thank you.
Jen?
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Chief and Lieutenant, for being here. I wanted to go back to the training piece a little bit. I have tremendous amount of respect for the kind of work that police have to do. I know that you are making life and death decisions on a daily basis, and not knowing every time you go out what's going to be required of you and how the threat might change. And what I want to ask you about is specifically how you talk with the officers and how you train them to kind of manage those quick decisions that you make. Because I think that what we know is that all of us, when we're making quick decisions, fall back to the things that we think we know, the biases that we have, the way that we perceive danger. And it's sometimes in those moments where we have to make really quick decisions that we rely on biases that can be really harmful. And it's not an intentional thing that's happening, but just kind of an instant reflex. And I'm interested, particularly because when you were talking about with the process that the dispatchers are going through, it sounded to me like what you were saying was that you recognize that sometimes people call the police and are maybe acting on some of biases that they have when they're calling to report somebody that they are viewing as suspicious, that you are intentionally putting in place some questions to kind of slow down the decision making so that you can decide, does it make sense to send somebody out or not? And I realized that, in the heat of the moment when you're actually interacting with the public, particularly in a position where you've been told that there's a crime being committed, that you don't have the luxury of a lot of time to make those decisions and slow it down. So I'm wondering what kind of training or conversations the department is having around implicit bias and kind of thinking about what each officer's own kind of opinions and fallbacks are, how to help officers make decisions that aren't just kind of anchored in those biases.
Yes, I'll answer that. We, again, with implicit bias, all sworn officers will have completed, and all current sworn officers will have completed implicit. Can you guys hear me? All officers will have had implicit bias by the 1st of April. All dispatchers also will be completing implicit bias training. That was part of in-service this year. So all the officers had it, but we additionally had dispatchers take it. The policy that you referred to and the chief talked about earlier, that is bias by proxy. And that's what we're trying to avoid. It's a defined thing. And that was actually part of the implicit bias training that we took. It talked about bias by proxy and making sure that whoever's talking to the person, whether it's a dispatcher or an officer, that they're making sure that it's the behavior that's suspicious. And that's a huge piece. As far as training and decisions being made instantaneously and within seconds, we really feel that this Milo, they used to be called Range 3000. It's a simulation machine. Yes, it's kind of like an arcade game, but it puts officers in real life scenarios that they may not be in this year, next year, 5 years from now. It's really random as far as kind of what experience you have. I could have an officer we could have an officer that's been on for a year and they may never even go to a domestic, or I'm sorry, 5 years, and then you could have one in their first year go to 3 in a week. So this Milo simulator will help officers. They'll place them in real life situations, very interactive, based on the people operating the machine can make changes to the interaction based on what the officer is doing, which is huge. So if the officer isn't asking any questions, it's going to be different than if the officer's maybe taking cover, maybe using some verbal judo, if you will, to de-escalate the situation. If they're not, it's going to get really bad really fast. So we're in the infancy of the Milo training. We're rolling through our first, I think we put everyone through 4 scenarios, 4 different scenarios. Then our training officers will develop another set of scenarios to just keep everybody fresh, to put them in real life potential crisis situations and make them make decisions and make them make the right decisions with de-escalation, or they're going to be in a really bad situation very fast. And there's an after action briefing for each scenario. So we have very highly trained officers that are not only trained in how to operate the machine, but also very highly trained officers that can debrief the officers, ask them what they could have done better, point out areas that were, they can actually rewind the video. It actually video records the officer, or actually, I don't know if it does, but they can rewind the video to where things could have been different.
But I think it also gives them an opportunity if they also indicate that, hey, maybe they made a decision based on race. They're not sure, but it's something that they've been instructed and they do bring up. And if they feel that there's a situation, they'll address that. A lot of our training too, you get into those high stress, low frequency, high risk situations that we do some training on, and those are the ones that are most dangerous for everybody involved. And what we're trying to do is, we want them to revert to muscle memory based on a set of facts of what they see. It's funny that I've been in a couple situations where if you ask me, I'm looking, when I come up, they have a weapon in their hand and I'm focused on the weapon, that's it. And I couldn't even tell you what the person was wearing. You know what I mean? And it's, so what we're trying to do is do a response based on the facts. And obviously there are some issues and it's something that we look at. And that's why we've tried to address some of that training, because we are aware that biases are with everybody. Everybody has biases. Everybody has implicit bias. So we're trying to make sure that, and obviously there's going to be improvements. There's going to be, now as new training comes out, we're taking advantage of that. The MPTC in-service training is addressing that. We address that with the Milo and also through different trainings that we have. So listen, at the end of the day, we're not perfect by any means. And we're always aware that we have to make changes, but some of those low frequency, high risk situations they happen so fast that you can't even, it's hard to even recollect what happened. And what we're trying to do is make sure that their muscle memory is good enough that they can see a threat and they can de-escalate a threat. Or, if they have to use, self-defensive measures, that they do so appropriately within the use of force continuum that was developed and is mandated by the state. So they're very difficult situations. And I don't know if there's a perfect answer to it, but we're trying to do everything that we can to make sure that we're making decisions based on fact pattern and nothing else. And like I said, we're not perfect, and we're always trying to do better, and we'll continue to do so.
Can you say how often the department will be getting the implicit bias training going forward? I understand you said everybody should be trained up with this initial round by April 1st. Is it something that you expect to be kind of an ongoing training issue?
I do. I think, from the states, the MPTC's vision is that it'll be something that'll be annually in service, but it's something that we can supplement as well. But it's not always going to be implicit bias. It could be some other fair and impartial policing. It could be something else, so it's not just that one thing. It's, new training comes up. We've done a lot of online training, so the options are a little bit more. So no, I think from the state, it's going to be continuous. It's going to be something that's going to be done on a yearly basis. And it's probably something that we're going to address on a yearly basis as well.
Thank you.
Chief, the last time that we talked about Milo, you weren't sure whether it really covered implicit bias from a racial perspective. So you've been talking, for example, about high stress, low frequency kind of events. What about lower stress, higher frequency events, but understanding if there is some bias there? Is that something also that Milo covers, or helps an officer to understand where his own biases are?
I don't know if it comes out exactly does that, but it doesn't, it's not individualized, but it can run through scenarios. So I think one of the scenarios, and I might be getting a little bit wrong, is that you get a call for, I think it was a robbery. And so you can change the scenarios, the people in it. And if you have a person of color that's in it, and I think the scenario, the way it rounded out is the person turned to you quickly. And one of them had a gun, one of them didn't, but it tests your reaction to that type of movement. So it's not like, not only does it talk about, you know, how you deal with race, but it also talks about being startled like that. Are you looking for, do you see a weapon, or are you just responding based on, you know, because your mind is, I'm going to a robbery, a bank robbery. And you get there and the person that fits the description turns to you quickly. Are you waiting to see the reaction? Are you waiting to see if there's a weapon to respond? So it doesn't individually do that, doesn't test every person, but you can you look at it through the eyes of the incident itself to say, okay, when he turned to you quickly, why did you had a gun, why didn't you shoot? Or why did you shoot? So the officers that run it are trained to try and pick up on some of those things and then try and address it as needed. It's not perfect, but you combine that with some of the other database stuff that we have, and if we can see a trend, then we address it.
Thank you. Ramin.
I want to follow up on yours and Jen's question and bring it to the subject of the Tidwell report. As is part of your training also addresses things like a fact that's been established of the prevailing and overwhelming in terms of the breadth of it, of fear of white police officers, of Black men. And I bring that up because when I saw the story of Mr. Henry, I was kind of surprised that here are 3 or 4 police officers with guns, batons, tasers, and not that they had been called for an armed robbery or an assault, they were called for shoplifting, and they felt the urge to, you know, put a handcuff on Mr. Henry. And I'm just my own experience. I have been in supermarkets and department stores where a alleged shoplifter has been stopped by a saleswoman or man, and then called, you know, a supervisor or a security person to come in, and they usually walk into a room. So I thought about that, and I was just looking to understand what's going on. And part of my research has showed this, there is study after study after study and survey after survey after survey showing across the nation that there is this thing that's basically fear. And I'm wondering if your diversity training has addressed that, and is that part of your training as well?
You know, I think when I first, maybe the first time I was here, I think I mentioned, and it wasn't in this forum, another forum, that, you know, officers are unfortunately, we're robotic sometimes in our response, and because we're thinking about what's going on, our safety, the safety of others, and we're not really considering what people feel of us or what they're thinking of us. And it's something that, you know, when I mentioned before, it's something that we have to look at, that we have to take into account that, you know, people always don't have the best view of police officers, or they might be nervous, or they might be this. And we necessarily don't take into account how people feel because we're more worried about our safety. And, you know, that's something, our safety is that has been ingrained in us since the first day of the police academy. And you see all the officers that are assaulted and killed every year. And, you know, so our mindset is going there, making sure that everybody goes home at the end of the day, regardless of, you know, what transpires. And I don't think we, in the past, as a profession, really take into account, you know, what other people think or how they feel. And it's.
But this is not what I'm asking about. I'm asking not about what the other person feels about the police. I'm asking about what the police feels about the other person. Now, you talked about implicit bias. If there's also implicit fear, and you haven't discussed it and it's not part of your training, it causes into actions that you don't want to have those actions. If in normal circumstances you're sitting and talking about it, no, I would never do that. But if that implicit fear is there, it causes into a certain roughness in behavior by the police, by certain actions that nobody wants. So I'm wondering if part of your training is that talking about this and bringing that up and discussing it. If it isn't, well, it isn't. Maybe it should be. But I mean, that's where I'm going with that, not what the other person feels.
I haven't,
I'm not sure that we've had anything on that, other than you could do the Milo and perhaps it would kind of show that.
yeah, I don't think we've had training that was specific to that. I've never seen training specific to that, but
Yeah.
it's something we'll look at and see if it's possible. I don't have the perfect answer for you, but we'll look at it.
No, I understand. I mean, I just brought that up. Thank you.
Well, and Ramin, I think we're all here to learn, and your point is a valid and fair one. I'm going to go to Marcus and then to Matt.
Thank you. And I think it's going to be a little bit on the same lines as what Ramin just said, and kind of in follow up to, I know the select board had a meeting last week, and the chief was on that as well, and issued an apology and kind of talked about the recommendations that were made. I just want to read some of this, and then I had some follow up questions about it. Some of the information from the first report that's public knowledge in the March 1st conclusion. And it says that, more than once during our interviews of the NPD officer, we heard words to the effect that Mr. Henry was in charge. So as if to infer that his release from arrest without further law enforcement was essentially no harm, no foul. It is similarly tempting for others to casually encapsulate Mr. Henry's experiences with NPD as having been in the wrong place or wrong time, or to minimize as a petty indignity of what he endured. Roughly 30-minute detention in handcuffs on a public street in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, in a mere two blocks from his workplace. And it goes on to say further in this statement that, our hope is that Mr. Henry's experience will serve as an impetus for a greater awareness of issues raised in this matter, implementation of policy and procedural modifications, we submitted above, in an overdue acknowledgement of harm caused to Mr. Henry. And I know that was in the first, the March 1st, and that was that was taken out of the later copy. So just when I think about this and the harm and, that was caused, and, to be in this community and to be a person of color in this community, and to be handcuffed, for people to see you that way, and by, so many 4 different police officers, when you are that Black person, we talk about Black men, what that feels like, and I can't speak for everybody. But to have that sort of embarrassment and to have that trauma and to have something like that, and then to get, got an apology for over a year after everything happened. And I know you talked about in that meeting last week that, maybe it took too long to kind of come to that resolution or to reach out. So 2 questions, as I wanted to know why this was kind of taken out of that first one and for the second one, and then a question to the chief, and then, to Matt and Marianne, Madam Chair, is as far as the apology went that we did in a public version, was there something that was issued, or did we reach out to him as far as, how, I guess, individually that you felt that we could have done better or apologize or reach out in that capacity? And if we have, I want to commend. And if we haven't, is there a reason why, you haven't reach out other than what we did for the 38 minutes last week?
So Kate will correct me, I guess, if I misstate anything. We have reached out. the town is under a notice of intent to litigate, right? So we have reached out to Mr. Henry's lawyers. We did that August, 9 months ago, whatever that is, right? In August. It was something that was talked about in July when the select board was notified. Immediately discussed, in fact, at the select board. It has not been part of our practice in the police, and that is a question that we have open as to whether it should be a practice. I had hoped we actually might get some guidance on that from Attorney Tidwell, but that's not one of the things. So it's still an open question for us with how that goes forward. And my understanding is that before we made the report public and all the documents public, we again reached out to the attorneys to let them know that we would be doing this and that we hoped that Mr. Henry would know that we are doing this. And we very much hope that one day we will be able to meet with Mr. Henry. It has not happened yet, but we are hoping that that will happen. The select board continues to be open to it. But so
Okay.
far, it's kind of mediated by lawyers.
Oh, so it has to be through lawyers in a sense. So we can't individually, or we can't, I say we as in you or the chief, you're not able to reach out and apologize to him in like as a person to person. It has to be through this is what you're saying.
We tried like Ms. Cooley said, in I want to say August that we reached out to the attorneys to say that we want to sit down and have a conversation. And that was denied by his attorneys back then. So it hasn't progressed further than that because of everything ongoing, but we did make that attempt.
Okay.
We are very much hoping that we will be
To have
able
that.
to sit down face to face. That has been our desire for a long time.
Thank you.
Other
Yeah.
comments and questions? Matt?
Sure, just on a couple of things here. You know, I just don't want to lose sight of the fact, and we've been waiting for this report for months. There's been a lot of discussion what's going to come out in the report, and there's this inference that the police department is racist. It's going to say that, and at the end of the day, right, our main takeaway here, what we were, you know, looking for the report to answer was this a race-based incident? And the report concluded that it was not. So I think I just want to kind of frame it that way, that if it were a different conclusion out of the report, we would be having a much different conversation than we are now. And of course, there are takeaways from it, as the chief talked about, and ways to improve and what we can do differently, you know, moving forward. But, you know, I'm just trying to frame it. I've been in this job 10 years or so, and always known the police to be extremely professional, extremely proactive with what I know you talked about diversion training, trying to get people who might otherwise go to jail, kind of, you know, off of that path in a better way to get them rehabilitated. There's just been a lot of proactive steps that this department has taken. And I know, you know, I've worked in law enforcement. I was a student prosecutor actually up in Concord. And I know the question asked about handcuffing and shoplifting, and white communities up there, I'll tell you that a shoplifting incident, I can't really speak, you know, for the police, but handcuffing because of a fear of running or drugs or something turning into, you know, even worse was very common when I was up there. So I think the policies and procedures that we have, you know, you look at the national level and things going on in that area that might need major overhauling, but in Needham, I think that, you know, some tweaks as we talked about, but as far as our interactions with the community, I liked what was said, you know, we're one community, we're one town, as we always say at town meeting, and, you know, the community policing aspect, and I like Natasha's idea of bringing conversations in, and okay, I don't feel comfortable with the police. Okay, let's start that conversation and find out why. So extremely unfortunate what happened to Mr. Henry, but I also quite honestly have to say, I think it's extremely unfortunate how the police, and I've gotten emails and from our seat on the board being called, you know, rush to judgment, they're racist or that our department's this and that, was also unfortunate. So I just want to say that piece from here. I know we can learn a lot from this what happened to Mr. Henry. And I think these conversations are great as far as the training that we're proactively done, and it seems like we're going to continue. Implicit bias and phone calls from dispatch. I think those are all positive steps. So thank you.
Yeah, but along the lines of that, Matt, I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
And you're saying, I don't think I'm saying that I think all the police are racist or anything like that, but race does play a role in certain things that happen. And one of the things that, that we've talked about is community outreach or working with community organizations that are doing this work, that are also researching and getting data and formulating data, where some of these statistics kind of say the opposite. I think the most recent one that we haven't had a chance to discuss is New RE, but it was sent to the police department and also sent to us, was from Equal Justice in Needham, and kind of, what findings and things that they were able to come up with and data to support that. And I know you're a very data-driven man, so I want to know, as far as that is concerned, Chief or Lieutenant, had you had the opportunity to look at any of that? And then, because some of that is going to be in correlation to what happens in recommendations that is formed from the Tidwell report. So I just want to know what you feel about that. But I don't think by any means that every officer is racist or the whole police department is racist. I don't think that's what everyone in this town is saying. I think we're just saying that as a whole, and when you say one community, one town, it doesn't necessarily feel that way all the time and in all aspects of what we're doing. So we're trying to find a better resolution in order to make that something that is consistent, and that we are led and that we lead with empathy and understanding that we are not all the same.
So I think it's important to recognize that this is the situation where, yes, although the report did come out and say that it wasn't a case of racial profiling, this is definitely an and, right? We are at the start of a lot of work that we can do to do many things better. So we do need to hold both things.
Just before it gets too much, I did not say that everyone thinks the police department's racist. We have, as a board, received emails from people that jumped to conclusions that this was a race-based event and then tarnishing members of the department. That's a fact. People can think different things, but that's the fact. The second thing about data, I am data-driven, but you have to go to the primary source, which is the direct data. People can interpret that data different ways, and you know how that is with, we have lawyers here, right? You can say, spin it one way or the other, or say that it says this or it says that. So I am very interested in the data, but you also have to consider the source when that data is refined of what they're trying to tell you with that data. So
okay,
we are going to have a discussion with EJN, I believe, coming up, and be interested in having that conversation at that time.
So
all
we
right,
will
about the
have a
data.
discussion
Okay.
with EJN, and when we have that, we will be inviting Nuwari to that meeting as well. It will come on April 27th, but so we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Tonight, we're sort of focused on Tidwell and the recommendations there.
Okay, the Chief, did you have any follow-up? I know I asked you the questions too, but did you have anything to say about any of that?
Yeah, looking at that report from EJN, and we're diving
Okay.
information to just look at it and see where it's coming from, and then we'll have a response to that at some point.
Okay, that's just great. I think knowing that is happening, I think that'll be great for just people to know in general. So we appreciate what you do, and we know that, as it's been told many times, that your job is very difficult, and we absolutely know that. And what we're trying to do with our group is we're just trying to bridge a gap of increasing that, the ability to want to feel more comfortable around the police with people that don't feel that way, or how we can do that in a better sense where we're uniting and using voices from all aspects of the community. So thank you.
I'm looking at hands, Jen, Ramin, and Toyin. Are you comfortable if I go to Toyin first, since he hasn't had an opportunity to speak?
Sure.
Toyin?
Hey, how you doing? Thank you both for being here today with us. I've been in the town for about 12 years, and I've had great interactions with the police department here. And I have to say that this report scared me, just because all my interactions have been in my house or on my street. But I couldn't see how this couldn't be me. There was just no way. If I was there in CVS that day, I was bigger than the guy, I probably meet the description more, I would have been on the ground, or I definitely would have been handcuffed. So for me, I just feel like I'm a little more scared than I used to be to go out in Needham, you know? Like, do I have to now wear a tie everywhere I go? You know, I usually like to go around with jeans and just casual, but it's a little scary. You know, that report, there was not, I mean, at least from what I could read, there was nothing similar to what the guy had. You know, like I'd have the same thing, a receipt, I'd have my car there, there'd be nothing in the car. I'd be handcuffed in my neighborhood for like half an hour, you know? So I just want to let you know that it's a little scary. It's you know, really hit hard to see that report, you know? And so I just hope that you, whatever you're doing, you feel that if that was me or someone else that was completely innocent, that they would not go through the same, you know, that it's not fair, you know, it's just not fair. Anyway, yeah, and I don't think people are racist, but I think everyone has racial bias. And when you're in a position where you can hurt people, you need to really check that bias. And so if you feel like there's people who can't take the job, there's people who should not be surgeons. There's people who should not be anesthesiologists. I know I could never do it. That's why I'm a pediatrician. So maybe there's some people who shouldn't be police officers if they really can't check their bias. And I don't know how you guys are going to deal with it, but I just hope you do.
You know what, obviously, we'll look at everything, and, you know, it pains me to feel that you'd feel that way, and I understand it, and I think it's a real concern. We're trying to ensure everything we do that it's fair. And, you know, based on the circumstances, it was one of those incidents where there was a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, that, you know, we didn't get it totally right, and we're aware of that. And, you know, hopefully going forward, we can try to, you know, be better and make sure that something like that doesn't happen again.
John, I'm saying this, and I hope you can hear the smile in my voice, but I'm going to say again that hope is not a strategy. And I'm looking forward to our building concrete steps so that we can all help to figure this one out. But I know you know that. Jen.
Thank you, Marianne. I think that we're best served if we can pull apart making this a question of whether or not the community or the people involved think that Needham is a racist town or that Needham Police Department is a racist police department. I don't think that's the question that we're really here to talk about, because I don't think anybody here really thinks that that's a conclusion that any of us really has. And I think that the Tidwell report did find that there wasn't enough evidence to say this was a case of racial profiling. But in my reading of it, at least, I don't think that it says that race was not a factor in what went down that day with Mr. Henry. And I think that we should aim to be able to talk about that in an honest way and in an empathetic way, not to be blaming people for doing something intentionally to hurt Mr. Henry, but to acknowledge that, like it's been said a couple of times here, we all have bias, and it comes out everywhere. The question is, was race a factor in what happened? It is, how did race impact what happened, or how did it lead to what happened? I think that otherwise we're not really being honest with ourselves about it, because race impacts every single interaction any of us has anywhere we go, whether it's buying something at CVS, being stopped for a traffic violation. It impacts everything. And so I think that if we can get past trying to cast blame in a way that makes people feel defensive about it, and acknowledge that we, as just like every other community on the planet, have to contend with how race plays out in our lives, whether we are a school teacher, a lawyer, a police officer, whatever we are bringing to the community, that race is going to have an impact on it. And I think that we are in such a good, close position to be able to face that reality and invite a conversation that we have not been able to have yet, because we're too afraid that we're going to be either personally called racist or that our town is going to appear to be racist. I think that we can do great things if we're willing to really start from a place of acknowledging that race impacts everything, and that if we can ask the question, what happens when race impacts everything, that we might get more honest answers from each other about what's happening. And also we'll be in a better position to be able to really make amends for the folks who are harmed by what happened, not just Mr. Henry, but the rest of the community, whether it's Toyin, who's now feeling like a little shaken up about what his next trip to CVS is going to be like, or all of the other Toyins that are in our neighborhoods. I think it's really, we've done so much to kind of talk about bringing some honesty and reflection to the work that we're doing. It's in our guiding principles that we all spent so long working on, that this is our moment to really accept this and try to get some answers and figure out what are those barriers that are out there right now that keep the police department from hearing these stories from the members of our community who are feeling that they're afraid to interact with the police.
Thank you, Jen. Ramin.
I think Twain and Jen have said it so eloquently, but I just want to make sure for the record, and I must admit, English isn't my first language. In fact, my wife would argue I don't have a first language. But I have read both of those reports multiple times, actually. And I didn't walk away with the impression that it stated anywhere that race wasn't a factor. As Jen very clearly and eloquently explained it, there was a narrow definition of racial profiling. But we shouldn't use that we shouldn't make that the narrative of this terrible and sad situation and story. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Vivian? Oh,
so go ahead,
Vivian?
Vivian.
I'm sorry, for some reason I don't have a raised hand function tonight, so I had to do it on screen. One of the things I want to note is that this work is very intentional, and I know that many of you were at the vigil on Saturday afternoon, and I had conversations with some where we talked about the fact that we need to create space for people to be able to speak and to speak up, not only for themselves, but for others. And I think it's one of the reasons why the organizations who came together to host the vigil on Saturday are so very important to our community. And I would encourage that, as race is clearly a factor in the decisions that are made intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously, we need to be sure that those spaces are out there. And so I would encourage that the work going forward, Chief and Lieutenant, not be limited to the proposals and recommendations that are in the Tidwell report, but that they go beyond that, that they go to the universe of being able to meet with the groups that are engaged in this work, create a greater sense of community, because it's only through those relationships that I think individuals in any profession start to see through the lenses of other people who are not like them, who don't have their lived experiences. And so, I encourage you to do that. I encourage the select board to think about creating opportunities for that to happen. And I think that is part of the work that's behind what New RE has done in establishing, these principles for the select board and for town meeting and for all of our committees and groups to undertake.
Sue.
Thanks, Marianne. Chief and Lieutenant, I just have a question building on what I've heard from everybody else and what Vivian was just saying. So I wonder to what extent there are conversations, maybe facilitated conversations within the police force reflecting on race and the officer's individual experience or what they're hearing from the community. Because sometimes, I know that they have certain pressures that we all may not, really understand. And certainly, I'm sure biases that come from the work that they do and their individual upbringing, et cetera. And sometimes maybe, while I totally support that you need to have conversations with the community and hear others' lived experiences, I also think that it might be helpful that they can have those conversations among themselves, not just training, but actual conversations about their own experiences and how they reflect on what they are, the reports and everything else that's been happening. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think in general, the conversations, a lot of the offices kind of work the same shift pattern. So a lot of them are together quite a bit, and they're quite close. So I know that they do have discussions with each other about things. I'm not privy to a lot of them, but we do have regular lieutenant meetings weekly and sergeants meetings through the course of the year where some of these discussions do come up, and we do have some candid discussions. Some of them are incident based when something happens, or we might have that conversation of, okay, you made this decision. And it, sometimes has nothing to do with race. It has something to do with why did you make this decision, or, so there are conversations that happen frequently within their kind of core group because they do work the same shifts. It's just, and we try and continue some of that with our supervisors and the command staff. But it's something that, we can always look for and kind of encourage to kind of, so we get some feedback too, because we do get some feedback from the bottom up, which is important to us to see what might be trending and what things we might have to address, going forward. So that communication within those groups is important.
So I want to be careful that the conversations are not necessarily like just supporting their own biases, but rather confronting their own biases. So it might be helpful if those conversations are actually tailored and facilitated so that it's more reflective and not, not a reaction to something. If I'm being a little clear, hopefully I'm being clear about that.
So I think, and the benefit of a conversation that's facilitated is it's somebody who has sort of an outside lens to be able to help you pull a situation apart and explore it and maybe think about it in a different way. And I do agree that's different than a supportive conversation with peers, which doesn't necessarily have the same effect. I know it's something to think about, and we can carry that on our idea list, and I'm sure that Kate has it flagged to come back to. Other thoughts? It's a lot to take in for everybody, right? On a subject that we don't usually talk about, but that we need to talk about. This question of community conversations is, I know, the one that Kate and I have been talking about, and we've been actually thinking about to the extent that those can be facilitated. What will that take, and what kind of funding will we need, and where can we secure that funding, and thinking about that. But I am hoping that that's something that this group will come back to as part of our recommendation that we're bringing forward to town meeting, because I do think it is a piece. All right, I'm going to do a going once, going twice. And if we're in pretty good shape, I really want to say thank you to the Chief and Lieutenant Baker. There was a question, Chief, I know that you know, that came up after your first visit here, where I'm going to say thank you to Lisa because she was the one who actually raised it, where she asked if you had thought about what your legacy might be in this area for the town. And I know that this is an area that you've given a great deal of thought to, given everything that's occurred. But I'm wondering if you've thought about that question about what is your legacy and how are you thinking about that these days?
I am thinking of, you know, obviously I have thought about it and I've kind of prepared some notes on it. And I think one of the things that you look at is, and we're in such a period of a pivotal time of change. And, you know, we are at that pivotal time in our country, in our profession, and leadership within our community can make lasting changes in its commitment for equity and justice going forward. You know, I hope at the end of the day, our police department can be viewed as a meaningful organization that strives to work with the community to encourage immediate and long-term proactive problem solving. It's always been a belief that most people see us as an enforcement-driven agency and not committed to working together to solve the problem. The ability for our department for always to try and do the right thing, the right way, for all the right reasons is a building block in establishing a bridge between our community and police department. I want the community and the department to look back on my time as chief as someone who was open, honest, and accessible to my staff and the community. At the end of my career, I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know that I supported my officers while holding them accountable. I was transparent when it was difficult to do so, and that we're able to incorporate sincere criticism into impactful change, and while also developing future leaders who will continue to follow the same principles that we have laid forth today.
Thank you for that.
I hope you accomplish that. We'd be in a better place. Thank you. All right. Believe it or not, it's only 7:47. I do have a ministerial question for all of you. You'll see on our draft agenda that we're planning at our next meeting next week, since we're having a 4-meeting month, I think was where we ended up this month, that we're going to be discussing our report, a draft of a report to annual town meeting. We'll want to come back to that later and finish it off, but just to give us a first time. So if all of you can be thinking about that, we're going to try to give some bullet points kind of to start with. If you have some things that you think you would like to see in that draft report and suggestions, I would encourage you to get them to Kate and Katie over the course of the next week as well, but we will talk through those. And then looking at April, we need to just confirm what our dates will be. I think we have 2 dates planned for April. And our proposal is that they be the 2nd and the 4th Mondays of April. I don't have a calendar up. I don't know if somebody else does, but the 2nd and the 4th Mondays.
It's the 12th and the 26th.
27th?
26th.
26th, 12th and 26th, okay. That means that we'd need to finalize a report for town meeting on the 26th, but that would still give us sufficient time to get it out to town meeting members. And we'd be planning on a public listening session on the 12th that would give other community members the chance to weigh in and have a conversation with us about any of the sessions that we've had actually with various town entities and the Tidwell report and the draft report to town meeting and the final recommended vision, guidelines, and intentional practices. Does that sound like an acceptable plan for the moment and people can hold those dates? Ramin, you're thinking, I see that.
So there were references made to the reforms having just passed or about to pass at the state for police reform. I was wondering if it's possible to invite our state rep to attend one of our meetings to explain what those reforms are and how they might be either in conjunction or, somehow supportive of the work that we are doing here in Needham.
Kate, I think we can probably find a time to do that.
I think we'd have to do it in May at this point.
Yeah, I mean, at some point.
Right, does that make sense? Because we really want to get a report out the door and it would have to get mailed pretty much the 27th because town meeting is the 1st. So I don't, and there's a holiday in the middle there. So yeah, but I'd be happy to ask Representative Garlick if she'd be willing to come. I'm sure the chief and soon to be Deputy Chief Baker, we can announce as of April 1st, Lieutenant Baker will be Deputy Chief Baker. So
Congratulations.
I'm happy to do that.
Jen.
Sorry, Marian, did you say April 12th is going to be the listening session?
Yes.
And will it run kind of similar to, did we have a listening? I'm trying to remember our listening sessions now.
We did.
And
We did one on the vision in, I'm not sure whether it was January or early February anymore, but sometime in that vicinity.
Is it worth talking about trying to think about the structure of it to see if we want to incorporate anything new to it to maybe maximize our ability to listen or to get people to the table to report out or to talk to us?
So I think we can definitely talk about that. I guess the question is, do you want to talk about it tonight or do we want to make that a part of our conversation next week?
I'm fine with waiting until next week. I just was throwing it out there because I think we had, that is something worth having a discussion about.
Okay. So we can certainly talk about that within the confines of an open meeting, but let's see if there's anything that we can come up with that can be a little bit different. All right. Everybody is pensive tonight. So I'm hoping we can go back and celebrate that we did send forward our vision and guiding principles. So that is a huge piece of work when we look at the to-dos for this committee. And I'm grateful to everybody for bringing that forward. I want to thank everybody for contributing to the conversation this evening and thinking about this Tidwell report. It's while it's clear that we have much to be grateful for, we do have much that we need to do so much better. And I think our goal is not to have, as I think Jen said, the many Toyans out in town, right, who are feeling worse about being in Needham rather than better. We want to get back to the point. We want to get to the point, not back to the point. We want to get to the point where all of our citizens can feel that there's an element of trust and that if something happens, that they will be treated fairly and equitably all the way through the process. And we're going to learn how to do that. Marcus.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to the chief and lieutenant that after the chief's statement that he just made is I'm really, it excites me and makes me really optimistic about what we're going to do together. And, you know, as our committee and what he wants to do with the town and moving forward and his legacy, because his legacy and what he said as far as his legacy is something that I want to be proud of to have as my legacy too. So I'm excited to see where we go from here and doing this work together. So that definitely makes me smile. So I can't wait to put all these words into actions.
Thank you. All right. If there's not anything else for tonight, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second, any discussion? Matt,
Yes.
Sue,
yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Ramin,
Yes.
Vivian,
Yes.
Natasha,
Yes.
Toyin,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. I want to say thank you, everybody. Thanks to Lisa, if she is still here. Thanks to everybody here. I so appreciate everybody's work on this. Thank you.
Good night, all.